Okay, and we're back, and we're so glad to have you back with us. Now, Nick has been explaining a lot of information, and I know you're listening to this. I hope you're not confused on anything, but he's going to clear up all the confusion. And we're going to be looking at IRS steps for collection actions. And of course, we hope that doesn't include you. So we don't want IRS to take any collection actions against you, but you need to know what IRS is doing. So Nick, go ahead and let us know exactly what can happen in this case.
So I want to start with the background here.
Okay.
And the background is how long the IRS has to collect taxes from someone. So from the day that someone owes, from the day that your return is processed or the exam ends, the IRS has from that moment until 10 years later, an entire decade.
10 years.
To collect the tax
Okay.
until unless it's fully paid before that time happens,
okay.
or resolved otherwise. But that's such a long time, which is why it's so critical to file an accurate tax return, and if it's audited, to respond quickly, because you want to make sure the tax amount you owe, you want to make sure the assessment is accurate, because as I said, 10 years is such a long time.
Absolutely.
And there are a few things that pause that 10-year clock. Things like you sign an agreement to extend the collection deadline, which is why, like with any contract, you want to read it, make sure you agree with it before you sign it.
And that's the contract with the IRS?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or you've submitted a collection alternative, which we'll talk about more, called an offer in compromise or an installment agreement. And during the time the IRS is reviewing those options, that clock pauses.
Oh, okay.
The other two common situations...
when you say pauses, how long can that pause be? They've got 10 years, so if they only pause it for 2 weeks, it doesn't really help.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but being an attorney, it depends.
Okay.
So let's say that you send in an offer in compromise, or OIC. That's the tax settlement program you've heard about.
Okay.
Generally speaking, in my experience, it takes the Internal Revenue Service about 4 months, maybe 5, to be able to get to it and review it because they have a big inventory.
Okay.
Legally, and I've only heard this happening once nationally, but legally they can take up to 2 years. So what that would mean is that the collection goes from 10 years to 12.
Okay.
Which is the reason it's so important to think about an OIC before actually pursuing one.
Okay. Well, even if it's only 4 months, it'd be 10 years and 4 months. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. A couple of other scenarios are if someone files a tax court case or has requested a collection due process hearing. And we've already talked a bit about the court case in the sense of a notice of deficiency. We'll talk more in a moment about that collection due process hearing.
Okay.
So that's really the background here. Next, I will talk a little bit about the steps the IRS takes. And the first one is they'll send a notice in demand, a written letter saying, hey, you owe this amount of tax, pay it by this deadline.
Okay.
And they've got to do that. And it's done through the mail, as I said, so it's always critical. You always want to make sure your address is current with the IRS.
Yes.
Because if you don't get it in the mail, you don't know what's going on. And so long as the IRS sends it to the last known address, they're fine. So you got to make sure you update that as it changes.
Oh, okay.
So the way it usually works is if you don't pay in full by the deadline on that first notice or secure a collection alternative, the IRS generally sends a second reminder of, hey, you've still got unpaid taxes, pay or establish a collection option by this deadline. So the message here is the same as in the first couple of sessions. The sooner the better.
Okay.
Don't wait. Act as soon as you've read it, processed it, and if you can find it and want it, assistance. That's how it happens initially. There is still a final step the IRS has to take before they can actually garnish your income or less commonly take money from your bank account.
Okay.
And that's called a final notice of intent to levy. And the way you can tell it's a final notice of intent to levy is that on the second page, usually it talks about a collection due process hearing, a CDP hearing.
Okay.
And the person has 30 days from the date on that final notice of intent to levy to request a CDP hearing. And that's valuable because you get to go to IRS appeals. You get to go to what should be an independent IRS employee to say, hey, IRS, I qualify for this collection alternative instead of a levy.
Okay.
And if the outcome's not favorable, you have the chance to go to tax court about that. So it's really, really an important set of rights that you lose if you don't use it on time.
Now, some people are going to be afraid to go to tax court. Should they be?
No, they should not. Almost, in my experience, IRS counsel is always reasonable, can work with them. It's actually even designed somewhat for people who are representing themselves in the sense of there's what's called a small tax procedure.
Okay.
So a taxpayer can decide, hey, I want a small tax case, and it is somewhat less formal, somewhat less of a intimidating process, I think, for those without counsel.
Okay. I know during the break I was telling you that I had gone to the IRS tax court and non-threatening all the way. And it worked out almost in my favor, well, 50-50, so that worked out well.
Yeah, I mean, the United States Tax Court is great because you've got on the bench this independent judge. You're the petitioner as a taxpayer, so you have to prove the case. Mm-hmm. So you get to start it by filing the petition. Then IRS counsel gets to file an answer, which is their response to your allegations. So it's like any court, you always get to have both sides explain to the judge their viewpoints, their arguments before a final decision. And one thing that people need to keep in mind about tax court, whether it is about a notice of deficiency or a final notice of intent to levy, is that a tax court case can take quite a bit of time.
Okay.
Because it's based in Washington, D.C., and the judges ride circuit, meaning they are in Las Vegas or Reno. This year, twice in Las Vegas, depending on whether it's regular cases or small cases, once in Reno.
Okay.
So because of that, a case can take quite some time to start until it gets to trial if it's not settled in the interim.
Now, I can't remember on my particular case, but did the interest and everything else on the amount, did it keep accruing while I was waiting?
Almost certainly. It's hard to say for sure without knowing the facts of the case, but certainly in a tax court case, a person can, because there are a few components here. One is the tax itself, right?
Okay.
And so that the person can dispute if they file a tax court petition within 90 days of the date of the notice of deficiency. Mm-hmm. So they can dispute that. They can also dispute penalties. And so because interest goes to tax and it goes to penalties, it is in the background being affected as well.
Okay. Again, because I appreciate income tax, I appreciate all the tax information, I wanted to make sure that our listening audience, our viewing audience, had a chance to hear from an attorney exactly what can impact your taxes. And that's why he's here today. So again, I want you to write down as much information as you can. If you have any questions, and not necessarily tax questions, but just to answer questions on what he's presenting today, you can call him at his office and say, look, I saw this presentation, I didn't quite understand this portion or that portion, can you explain it? That they can do, and then they can explain how they can help you and when they're able to help you and when VITA might be better for you.
Yeah, so. And what I'd like to talk about briefly as well is, although a person can only get a collection due process hearing if they request it within 30 days of the final notice of intent to levy,
okay,
it's important to request a hearing anyways, because if it's between a month and a year, a taxpayer is entitled to what's called an equivalent hearing, meaning they still get to argue their case to IRS appeals. The only difference really is that they can't go to court if they disagree with the decision. That's
Okay.
the main distinction between the two.
Okay. We can agree with that. Okay, that sounds good. And if they want to call you, I guess we can put your number back up on the screen. If they call you, what would you be telling them before you actually have their case?
Yeah, so the way it works is you call the toll-free number 855-657-5489. And most likely it will go to my colleague's voicemail. And you leave your name, your phone number, a brief description of your IRS tax dispute as well as your goals. And then she will call you back, get more information about your income, your assets, other questions we need answered to see if we can provide legal assistance. And then at that point, we take it to a meeting in-house to see if we can accept the case, and if so, what we can do.
Okay.
And our representation is very broad. It can be anything from the front end, representing during the exam, to the U.S. tax court, to IRS hearings. It could even, in some cases, be possible to go to a different federal court. We can help people with identity theft issues. We can help them stop collection action through currently not collectible status. We can do it through an installment agreement, offers in compromise, a whole series of different kinds of assistance.
A lot of options there. That's fantastic. And how long have you been around?
I've been with Nevada Legal Services, LITC, for roughly 2 years.
How long have they been around?
Oh, a long time, like 2000, I want to say,
Okay.
roughly.
This is the first time I've heard of LITC, and when you sent me the request to come on the program, this was very exciting because it's something I don't think we've had in Pahrump or Nye County. So I was very, very glad that you agreed to come in and share all of this great information with our audience.
I'm glad to be here. And the thing, too, about low-income taxpayer clinics is Nevada Legal Services, we cover the entire state of Nevada, but I believe every state, except maybe one or two, has at least one LITC program. So this is a nationwide kind of service in the sense of availability.
Well, we're going to be going to our last session in just a couple seconds, and we're going to be talking about legal alternatives to the IRS taking people's income or other property. So we want you to definitely come back, join us for that, and be ready to take more information.
Thank you.